All right, 9:55. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Race and Contemporary Society. If you didn't already know, if this is not your class, obviously, it should be fairly clear by now. I am Dr. Julius Doyle. I'm going to formally introduce myself and the details about myself in a moment. But this is the important information that you need. The first thing is you can always contact me by email. I do need you to kind of take email with a grain of salt on the faculty side of things. There's lots of administrative emails, faculty meetings, that kind of thing. And sometimes your emails can get lost in the ether. So if for whatever reason, because it has happened repeatedly in the past, if I do not reply to your email in a timely manner, let's say within 24 to 48 hours, a reasonable span of time, just do me a favor and reply back to the email that you sent me, which then puts it back in the top of my inbox so that I can see it. You might have to do that, you might not, but just give me grace in that regard, because on my side of things, I get lots of emails and then students kind of take it personal when I don't respond, but I wasn't trying to upset you. So just be mindful of that. My office is in my office hours. You'll usually find me in there. If those times don't work for you, I am always available via a virtual appointment. So like you can't meet for office hours or whatever reason, you can send me an email. You can say, hey, Dr. Doyle, I'd like to meet with you virtually on Friday at noon. Does that work for you? Usually, if you send me the day and the time that you want to meet, I will send you with a virtual invite, like a meeting, like a Teams meeting with that appointment time, and it has a link and everything, and you can meet with me virtually that way. Okay? There's lots of things that I kind of want to talk about today, obviously, because it's day one. We're going to be talking about, obviously, I'm going to introduce myself. You can kind of get to know me, get familiar with me in the academic sense. We'll talk about course trajectories, what you can expect to get out of this class, and as well as syllabus logistics, and then just a basic introduction of concepts. The concept of race is what we're going to be talking about today. At any point, for any reason, I like for my classes to be like I don't want to say like a back and forth, obviously, because I have lots of lectures and talking points that I want to get to. But if for whatever reason you have a question, you want to ask for clarification, maybe there's some kind of experience you want to chime in and share, or there's information you want to expand, I always encourage my students to fact check as well. Obviously, my brain is not Google. I don't have access to the internet. So there's lots of questions you might ask that I might not necessarily have all of the facts about. I will encourage you all to fact check me, either search on your phone or your computer or something and then chime in. This is a way that I encourage students to engage. So if for whatever reason you have questions or something like that, just raise your hand. Feel free to interrupt, obviously. Ask your question. I'm kind of relaxed like that, okay? Hello. Welcome. So a little bit about myself. I already introduced my name. I'm Dr. Julius Doyle. Believe it or not, I am actually an LMU alum. I was a student here as an undergrad in 2008. I started as a freshman here. Hi, welcome. And then I graduated in 2012, and I was a biology major. Are there any bio majors in here? No. Okay. I was a biology major at first, and it was literally just biology. But I had to take a history requirement, and all of the history classes that I had to take were completely filled out to capacity, so I couldn't register for those. So I was able to work with the dean and the chair of the department to basically fill my history requirement by taking African American Studies, which at the time was just an elective. It wasn't like a required course or anything like that. And it was literally from day one of taking my first African American Studies class that I realized, like, there's a lot I don't know about myself. There's a lot I don't know about American history. There's a lot I don't know about race or racism. And I felt like it was really important for me to kind of learn those things. And so it was literally from day one, I was working towards declaring a minor, ultimately declared a minor in African American Studies, and I just kind of balanced the two. Once I graduated from here, I immediately got accepted to a master's PhD concurrent program at the University of Washington in Seattle. Where I, first of all, completed my master's in anthropology. Does anyone know what anthropology is? No, no one. Okay, 2 people walking in. Do you know what anthropology is? No, okay, welcome. Please have a seat, no worries. Most people don't know what that is. It is the study of humans. It is the study of human beings as biological organisms, as cultural beings, as linguistic beings, highly complicated, psychologically complex, culturally complex beings, and the ways in which those things interact ultimately to produce the aspects of humanity that we observe in all of its complex and intricate and beautiful forms, right? From completing my master's, I went on to complete a doctorate, obviously, in biocultural anthropology. So that is the interdisciplinary study of biology and culture in the human context, where my subject matter expertise was African American anthropology. So everything to do with African Americans as human beings and as human beings in the context of living in the US, right? For all its strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons. After I completed my PhD, I went on to do a postdoc at SUNY Binghamton in New York, where I was a part of the medical anthropology program, basically providing classes on how to better treat in a clinical context, African Americans who are largely still distrustful of the American medical system for very complex history and complicated reasons. And then I became a professor, a tenure-track professor at St. John's University in Queens, New York, in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. Yes, please tell me your name. And why did I go so many places when I...
Where you were gonna freeze.
Oh.
Oh.
Where I was gonna freeze, yeah. Great question. Ultimately, the University of Washington was a choice for me, but everything else after that was sort of career related. That's just where my career kind of dragged me to. I grew up here in LA. I wasn't born here. I was born in Portland, Oregon. But I grew up here in LA, and me and my wife, we had a baby in the middle of the pandemic. And New York became this place where I was like, I don't really want to be in here. Let's go back to LA. And so we ended up back here. But because I had professional connections and relationships with faculty in the African American Studies Department as an undergrad, and then ultimately got the credentials to even come back and teach here, they just kind of invited me and extended a job offer. And so that's how I came back here. It may entirely be the case for you that you might find that you get along with me or some other professor in the future. And if you maintain that relationship, there might be a job opportunity for you in the future. Who knows?
Come back to see all of our beautiful faces.
Yeah. Actually, believe it or not, crazy thing. Coming back to campus is like, there are lots of faces that are very similar to the faces that I saw when I was a student. It's weird in a way. It's like a deja vu, including the black person with the pink hair, right? So I don't know. Time has a real interesting way of repeating itself. But anyway, this is just a little bit about myself. Now, let's talk about course trajectories, what you can expect from this class. Now, first of all, this is race in contemporary society. So we're going to be talking about race. We're going to be talking about racism. But as an anthropologist, I really like to emphasize humanity and seeing the human beings for who they are in all of their uniqueness and their beauty. So we're going to learn a lot about the anthropology of race. But we'll also be learning about African American history too. Obviously, this is an African American Studies 1050 class, and it wouldn't be right for me to just only isolated talk about race without talking about African American history. So you'll be learning a little bit about that too. And because of that, that also means that we're going to be not just talking about the anthropology of race, but also racism and the intricacies therein, including politics, social values, political conflicts, complicated histories, and things like that. So those are the things that you can mainly expect from this class. Now, I like to do an approach called snowball learning, okay? Snowball learning in my class essentially means that as the weeks go on, every week we're going to be learning about different themes, different topics that are embedded within these different chapters. And to some extent, you could treat them as their own individual context, their own individual subjects. But I also want you to build on what we're learning. So week after week after week, you should be building upon the knowledge that you learned in the week before, such that you're kind of snowballing your knowledge, you're snowballing your learning. Right? So that means that there is the expectation that you're going to be keeping up with the coursework, even if For example, you do not show up to class or you don't show up to lecture or something like that, right? You're still responsible for staying on top of the reading because there will be lots of concepts that we may have discussed in a week prior that then has some relevant connection to some future topic that we're discussing. So it's on you to stay up to date with the pacing of things and just kind of go about it that way. Okay. All right, syllabus logistics. I'm going to kind of break this down in the subsequent slides, but essentially we're meeting 2 times a week, okay? For you, you're the Tuesday, Thursday schedule. Things are a little bit more straightforward on your end. I have a Monday, Wednesday schedule, and they're kind of thrown off by all of the holidays. But for you, it's fairly straightforward. Because we're meeting 2 days out of the week, with exception to this week, week 1, every time that we meet, you will have something due, okay? So we have a core book, and then we'll have extended readings. I'll talk about what the core book is in a moment. But with the core book, there are these critical thinking questions that are at the end of every chapter, okay? You're responsible for submitting your answers to those before the start of class, okay? So the due date for your assignments will always be just before class. So on Tuesdays, you're submitting the critical thinking chapter questions. On Thursdays, you'll be doing reading summaries. There's extended readings. These extended readings are all available via in PDF format on Brightspace, okay? So you're gonna do those readings for Thursday and then write a 1 to 2 page summary of what you've read and then submit those to Brightspace before class on Thursday. All of the due dates are listed on Brightspace, so nothing should be confusing. Yes?
Do they have to be MLA formatted or anything? Or can they just be written?
I don't know too much about whether you would need to cite, but I will accept MLA formatting and MLA citation. Okay. Okay, so basically you'll have chapter reviews, and I should have put here reading summaries, but essentially that's what it is. You'll always have chapter questions on Tuesdays, reading summaries due on Thursdays, with the exception of this week. This week, there's nothing due, okay? Now, throughout the entirety of the class, you will have quizzes. Those are kind of peppered throughout, and I'll explain that to you as we go along through the class. But in general, you'll have 2 exams, just a midterm and a final, okay? And I'll explain what that is in a moment. Also, course engagement is a heavy component of this course. Well, not heavy, but relatively important component of the course. I want to hear from you. Maybe you have a question. Maybe you have some contribution you want to make to class. Maybe there's a point or something of interest or something that you want to explore just a little bit deeper and unpack or clarify or something like that. That counts as engagement. I just want to be able to have, like I said, not necessarily a back and forth, obviously, because I have things I want to get to, but I want to be able to engage with you as we're going through the class. So this should be more or less just weekly conversations about race and racism for all of its beauties and horrors, right? Okay, now your core book. Your core book is Race and Racisms. There's other AFAM 1050s that are teaching by different professors. They have their books in the bookstore. My book is different. This is the book you're going to be using. So if you bought the wrong book, please return it to the bookstore. The link to a digital copy of this book is available on Brightspace, okay? This book is only $33. Okay? I need you to know, though, that it must be the brief 3rd edition of Race and Racisms, okay? Not the regular 3rd edition. It must be the brief 3rd edition. And the reason for that is because I'm pairing the material that we're reading about here with the extended readings that you'll have on Thursdays, okay? So when you purchase this book, it must be the brief version. Everybody got that? Everybody clear on that? Okay. And then the extended readings, like I said, every Thursday, for the most part, we'll be talking about some kind of extended reading. Either we'll be reading about research, or we'll be reading from some other critical perspective from some other race scholars. And those readings will always be available on Brightspace in PDF format. Yes?
Are those the books like Between the World and Me and Asada and those ones?
No. Anything that you've seen in the bookstore pertaining to AFAM 1050, but it wasn't your section, is not the things that I'm assigning. So for my class, purchase nothing from the bookstore. Okay? If you have, please go return it, get your money back. This is what we're doing here. One of the reasons why, I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons why I tend to avoid the bookstore is because they'll upcharge. If you purchase a digital version of this book for $33, just online, it's $33. If you get it from the bookstore, it's like $40, $45, $50, and it's not really that. I just don't like doing that. I'd rather encourage you to just be kind of cost efficient, right? So there you go. So so just make sure that, again, it's Race and Racisms, but it is the brief 3rd edition, not the 2nd edition, not the 1st edition, because there's different questions in there. It must be the brief 3rd edition. Okay. All right. What's the next talking point? Right. Okay. So your homework submissions. Tuesdays, you're submitting the critical thinking questions. These are found at the end of each chapter. Sometimes it's like 4 questions. Sometimes it's like 7. But the point is, it's your opportunity to engage with what you've just read, as well as what you're learning from the lectures, right? But they're critical thinking questions. They're not necessarily questions that you should kind of be short-winded. I'm not looking for 1 to 2 sentence responses. I'm looking for like a hefty paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs, obviously depending on the nature of the question that's being asked. But be sure to follow the instructions of each assignment on Brightspace carefully. I've tried to make it so that those instructions are very clear. If they're not, feel free to reach out to me. Obviously, I'm human. I can make an error somewhere, or there could be an oversight. If something's confusing to you, please ask about it, and I'll be sure to clarify. But just be sure to follow instructions as carefully as possible so that you're not getting points docked. Or you're not missing out on what I intended for you to get from that experience, right? The other thing is you're going to get out what you put in, right? So I've had lots of students who just want to come to class and, you know, they think they know everything. They come in here and then essentially their approach to everything is, you know, racism is bad, okay? And then like they end up failing the class because it's very clear that there's like, they just have a one-dimensional understanding of the things that that we're talking about. They didn't study, they didn't do the reading, they're not engaging with anything, they're not raising their hand and asking a question, they're not answering any questions, right? It's very obvious. But for those students who are engaging, who are the ones that are raising their hand, making contributions, talking to me, asking for clarification, that effort really does show up in the quality of your work and the quality of your submissions, and that really is going to make the difference between sink or swim, essentially, right? Okay, I've already said to you that each assignment is going to be due before every class session. Every time we meet, something is due, so expect that, okay? With the exception of this week, okay? And there are no late submissions, okay? Now, there's an exception to this. I've had students who tried to email me their assignments like maybe 5 minutes after the deadline has passed or something like that. I will not be accepting email submissions, okay? And the reason for that goes right back to what I just said about email. I get inundated with emails left and right, and then trying to keep track of which students sent me which assignment and which assignment that belongs to from which section. Did I even see the email? Can I keep track of it? It becomes chaotic, it becomes hectic. So if you miss your submission, don't worry. I have something called Amnesty Week. Amnesty Week, there's 2 of these. One Amnesty Week during midterms, and then one Amnesty Week during finals. Amnesty Week is your opportunity to submit up to 2 assignments that you either missed, you got a 0 on, or maybe you got partial credit, and you can make up those points without penalty, okay? So if you happen, maybe you're just like, fuck it, I don't feel like submitting anything for this week. I'm just inundated. I got this other stuff in this other class or something like that. You can be strategic about missing your assignments and then just resubmit the assignment for Amnesty Week and come back around and get that full credit, okay? So don't feel like you have to freak out if you miss the assignment or you miss the submission and it's too late. But it's limited to 2, so make sure that you're staying on top of your work, you're staying on top of the course load, okay? What is this? Engagement? Oh, participation. Yeah. So engagement is important. It is required. This is a class about race and racism. It's not a very useful class if all I'm doing is just kind of talking to the wall and there's no response. I don't have a back and forth. I can't see what you're learning. I can't respond to perhaps where the gaps in knowledge are. So your engagement with me is really pivotal to our success in this class, okay? And this is partly why reading assignments, submitting those chapter questions is due before class. It also ensures that you've done the reading and that you're prepared to come to class in effort to talk about a lot of the things you just read about. What I don't do in my classes, I hate this, is I just read an entire chapter and then I sit in on a professor's lecture and then they just repeat the exact same information to me. That's not gonna happen in this class. What's gonna happen is you're gonna do the reading, and I'm gonna be talking about things related to the reading, but I'm also filling in with a lot of gaps, a lot of things that didn't talk about, the background information behind those things. So you're getting a lot of unique information related to those topics, but very different. The lectures are very different from the reading. So if you do the reading and you come prepared, having done the reading, you should be able to engage with me. You should be able to have those conversations while you're still learning something new. Right? Because participation is required, your points, part of the points that you earn towards your final grade is tied to your ability to raise your hand, ask a question, answer a question, contribute something, maybe it's a fact check of some kind, right? Engage with the class in a way that shows me that you're invested here, you're engaged, and you're learning. Well, it's context dependent, right? So we're going to be talking about a lot of very serious things, a lot of dark things, a lot of politically contentious things. It's not always going to be a moment for brevity, but if it is contextually appropriate, I invite you to do so, okay? But again, not participating means lost points, okay? Now, that doesn't mean you all should be competing for raising your hand and getting a question answered over that other person. But raise your hand, ask a question. I'm not looking for you to repeat the exact same thing I just said 2 seconds ago, and then that counts as participation, but that I can call on you maybe more than twice, right? And I'm gonna be learning your names. I'm gonna be learning your faces, so I'll be able to keep track of the rapport that we build, okay? Part of your engagement, maybe you're nervous, maybe you're shy, maybe you don't like raising your hand in front of class, especially in a class about racism. What if I say the wrong thing? I really don't want to come off as like a bad person because I said this racially problematic thing, but I was just asking because I wanted to know and I feel bad. Don't overwhelm yourself, okay? There's other ways to earn engagement. If for whatever reason you don't want to say anything in class, you can come to office hours. And you can talk with me and you can engage with me one-on-one in office hours and still get the same points that you would earn in class, okay? So I don't want to be punitive with engagement in that regard, okay? If you do, however, engage in class and then you come to office hours and you have some extensive question or expansive question because you want to dive deeper into the material or you want to gain clearer insight or understanding and you want to have a conversation with me about those things, that's an opportunity to get extra credit, okay? I've had students either schedule an appointment with me or just regularly show up to my office hours and then take the time to just ask these deeper questions and probe my knowledge about these topics. And then they just stack up a bunch of extra credit points such that by the time you get to, where it's final exam season and maybe like they bombed like 2 out of the 6 questions they had to answer, they still end up with a 100 in the class because they just stacked up a bunch of extra credit as the weeks went on. That's entirely possible. And if you're that kind of student who shows up regularly, I know what you're there for. That's okay. I'm not gonna you're trying to get your extra credit points. I'm not gonna make you feel that way. Be strategic about how you want to earn your points in this class, right? I told you, the more you put in, the more you get out, and I truly mean that, okay? So I've had lots of students who were very successful in class, despite the fact that they were imperfect in some areas, and still come out with a perfect score because They took advantage of the opportunities that were there. So just know about that, okay? Do know that it has to be purposeful office hours visits. It can't just be a question about what's going to be on the exam and what do we need to know and blah, blah, blah. It's questions that are probing into the deeper nature of these topics. And if you're there to expand your learning, that's where you'll find that I will give you the extra credit. Okay? All right. Yes, to some extent, because of engagement, it is subjective, right? It is me observing you and your behavior and the context in which you are earning those points. But I'm fairly liberal when it comes to awarding those points. I'm not a punitive professor, and I hope you'll get that from my demeanor. Okay. Now, the course webpage, obviously for all of your other classes as well, you can find everything that you need and submit everything that you need to through Brightspace. If you're not aware, go to brightspace.lmu.edu and you'll find all of your course information, including the other courses that are not mine. You can find access to those materials there. Anything that you submit, should be in PDF format. I've had students try to submit JPEGs, .txts, all kinds of weird files. I'm not looking for that. Just make sure that it's formalized in the PDF format. The other thing I feel like I shouldn't have to say, but unfortunately I do, font size 12, Times New Roman, 1-inch margins, double spaced. Okay, fairly straightforward. Make sure it follows that format. If you deviate from that format at all, it is likely you could get points docked. Okay, so just follow that format.
Georgia, okay.
Georgia?
Yeah, the font.
No, Times New Roman. Okay. And then, like I said, I'm not going to be accepting email submissions because it's just too much to keep track of. If you miss your submission, make sure you get it in for Amnesty Week. And then other than that, just take advantage of extra credit, right? And those are ways that you can fill in those points. It is entirely possible for you to miss points and still succeed in this class. So don't freak out if you're imperfect in some way, okay? For your exams, like I said, there's only 2 of them, midterm and a final. They will always be in person, okay? So when you come in for your midterm, you will bring an exam booklet. It's a green blank booklet that has just blank pages that you can write in them. You'll want to bring one and make sure that it's blank. Now, with your midterm and your exam, do know that I'm going to give you the questions a week before we actually do the exam. So you're going to know what's on the exams. It's not a surprise. I'm not trying to catch you when you fail or when you slip up. I want to give you the opportunity to prepare and study and then come in class and succeed. So you're going to know exactly what's on the exam. But the caveat is that you don't know which questions will be asked, okay? So you will get a list of 24 questions that relate to whatever the topics in that, let's say for the midterm, you'll get 24 questions that relate to everything that we've discussed, okay? And within those 24 questions, you can study. Do whatever you need to study. You have the questions, you know what's on there. But then when it comes time to come to class, we're basically going to be drawing little pieces of paper from a little bucket. And whatever paper gets pulled randomly, that's what questions you have to answer. So you don't know which questions you have to answer. That's how that works, okay? I've had where students, for example, I've had 2 students that were like, I want to draw, and then they both draw, and then they do rock, paper, scissors for it, and then whoever wins the rock, paper, scissors, that's what the rest of the class has to do. But you'll be answering 6 out of the 24 questions, and that will be your exam. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Same thing for the final. The only difference is for the final, there are 4 mystery questions, and you won't know what those mystery questions are, so it puts it on you to continue to study, but it's still the same format, randomly drawn. But again, I'm not trying to catch you when you fail. They're not trick questions. It's just, it puts it on you to study. Right? Okay. The responses for the exams should be short. I would say you could probably get away with answering each of the questions in like a paragraph or 2. Obviously, that's going to depend on the nature of the question being asked. But if you feel the need to like write an entire page, you're welcome to do that, but you don't necessarily have to be too excessive. Just make sure you answer the question and make sure you demonstrate understanding, okay? It's fairly straightforward, and you'll see as things go on. We'll talk about that. There's two AIs, right? There's academic integrity and then there's artificial intelligence, okay? Academic integrity, I'm not gonna go through the policies of the code of conduct of ethics and blah, blah, blah at LMU. You can read all of that, you know what it is. Don't cheat, don't be a jerk. That's really academic integrity. That's what it comes down to, okay? Artificial intelligence. I recognize that artificial intelligence is here to stay. I cannot control your access to AI. I encourage you to use it to study, right? If there's a way that you can use AI to accelerate your learning, by all means, use it. But please, do not use AI to try to submit the work of AI as if it were your own, as if you did it, okay? I do indeed read all of your submissions because I want to monitor your progress. I want to see what you're learning, but I want to see how you as individuals, as actual real people, are engaging with these things. So I'm not looking for that absolutely perfect, flawless submission that's perfectly articulated and organized, and I'm not looking for that. I'm not looking for perfection, okay? I'm okay with seeing your flaws or your slip-ups, but I want to see what you're doing, what you're learning, what you're getting out of it. So if there's a way for you to use AI that helps you to study, by all means. But when it comes to submitting things, please be a human being, make the effort, make the engagement, because I am looking for those things, okay? If you haven't noticed, I have a microphone, I have a camera here, okay? There's lots of students right now that are not here. I don't know in various sections, but they haven't flown into LA due to the fires or due to some other reason. So this semester, I'm trying to make these lectures more accessible to them, which includes me recording myself and recording my camera, okay? So right now I have my camera on, I'm recording audio, I'm recording video, and the camera is on me, okay? I'm not trying to point it at you or anything like that, but I will be making an effort to learn and memorize each of your names, but those names, whoever I call, that's always going to be censored. So when the final video is uploaded, anything about your identity is going to be completely removed. I'm pointing the camera directly at me because I don't want to reveal your faces, obviously. Just know that I am making the effort to protect your safety and your identity, and none of your names will be revealed, even though I am, in fact, making an effort to learn your names and call you by your names. The lecture episodes will be released on YouTube. I don't want to promise like a specific time or day because I have to do a lot of editing, but I am making the intentional effort to get them out there, get them uploaded, so that if for whatever reason you want to go back and review what I may have talked about, or maybe you want to share my lecture with somebody else, you have the ability to do that, okay? Also, I have an additional microphone here. I will be passing it around. You're not obligated to talk in the microphone if I'm not trying to force you to do that. But if your question is interesting enough, I want other people to be able to hear those things. So I will be passing around a microphone, and I encourage you to speak to me, but make sure it can pick you up and hear you, and then we can kind of have that back and forth that way. Once you're done speaking, you can just hold on to the microphone, like let it sit on your desk or whatever, and then when someone else raises their hand, just pass it off to them, right? And we'll just kind of work at it that way. If you can work with me in that regard, I know it's a little bit annoying to have to constantly pass something around, but it makes all of this more accessible for the people who aren't here. So just work with me in that regard, okay? Because there are live microphones, including the live microphones that may or may not end up on your desk, please don't troll the microphone, okay? No fart noises, no giggles or jokes or anything like that. Let's try to be professional. Let's make sure that we're all doing our diligence to help other people have access to these things. Is that okay? All right. Okay, so I've already said this. This is a class where I want to have those discussions. I want to have a back and forth with you. I want to be able to get and observe your perspectives or dissect them a little bit. We're going to be talking about things, and not necessarily in a confrontational way or a conflict-oriented way. I hate pitting students against one another. I will never do that to you. But this is a class about race. This is a class about racism. There are sensitivities. There are areas of ignorance that we all have, including myself. I'm not perfect, right? But just know that everyone is here to learn, and we need to treat everyone as such. Maybe somebody doesn't know something that you do. Don't scoff at them or make them feel stupid or insignificant for feeling or their areas of ignorance. They are, in fact, here to learn. So let's all be conducive to helping people to learn, okay? And if you have a disagreement, I encourage you to disagree, right? I'm not necessarily encouraging you to engage in conflict or engage in argument. In fact, that never happened when I've taught this class in the past. But if you do have a disagreement, please articulate that, share that, but have a basis for it, right? Don't just say you disagree because this is just how you feel. It's like, be sure that you can put into words and clearly articulate what your feelings are and why. This will help us to expand our discussions around race and racism so that we're all here to learn. There are absolutely going to be controversial topics discussed because it's a class on race, it's a class on racism. There's literally nothing that we're going to talk about here that isn't controversial. So just be ready for that, okay? I need you to know that I'm making the effort to respect people's sensitivities. I need you to make that effort to respect people's sensitivities. But if you do hear a perspective that you're just like, oh, it ruffles my feathers, that's an opportunity for you to reflect on why, okay? Because again, everyone is here to learn and we need to treat each other as such. Now, I want you to know that particularly for my white students, white people, I am not here to make you feel guilty or shame or responsibility for any of the fucked up history that your ancestors may or may not have been a part of. I don't personally think that you're responsible for any of the things we're going to talk about in this class. We're going to be learning about whiteness. We're going to be learning about white rage, white supremacy, these kinds of things. Yes, very controversial. Yes, very sensitive topics, but it's not my goal to make you feel persecuted when I'm talking about these things. I have had a student in the past get triggered in my class and then go to Fox News and then tell Fox News that I am creating an environment of political persecution in my classroom because of the discussions we've had about these things. And then Fox News reached out to me and LMU media team talking about, we're gonna go live with the story if you don't come and respond to us by 5 p.m. and da-da-da-da. If I say something that triggers you, please come talk to me first. Hey, Dr. Doyle, I didn't really like the way you said some X, Y, and Z. Could I get clarification? Can we talk about it? I'm always willing to engage with you. Now, if I turn around to you and I go, no, fuck that, you should feel da-da-da-da, then go to Fox News. Feel free. Go to them, tell them I'm making you feel persecuted. But in reality, I'm not that kind of person, okay? I wanna make sure that everyone here feels comfortable. They're learning. That's what I care about, okay? So just come to me before you go to Fox News. Let Fox News be a last resort, okay? Then, for all of the literature, including the core book, none of these things are like the inerrant word of God, right? There are flaws in them. They have limitations. Maybe they don't talk about things in the right ways. And if that sticks out to you, talk about that. Share that perspective. This book, it had an error, or it said something here that wasn't quite true. I didn't really like the way it talked about X, Y, and Z. Share those things with the class, okay? Because it's all of this, all of the flaws that you may find are opportunities for us to have a holistic and comprehensive discussion about these things in a very grounded way, okay? Now, we will inevitably get to the topic of the N-word, where it comes from, how it's used, in what context. I'm the only one that gets to say it, okay? If you want to ask a question or you want to get clarification, always just refer to it as the N-word. But I will be using this word, yes, for academic reasons. I don't just throw it out willy-nilly. But I will be using this word frequently throughout the class and for strategic academic reasons. So just be prepared to hear the word nigger, okay? That's gonna happen. But I want you to make sure that you know that this is a Socratic discussion, open forum kind of way. This is that class on race. If nowhere else, this is the setting where you can ask that question you might be uncomfortable asking, but just do so while respecting other people's sensitivities, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. These are the learning objectives. It's a bunch of words on a screen. You can find this on the syllabus, so I'm not really going to go on this. This is verbatim what you can find on the syllabus, and it's everything that you would expect to learn in the class. So I'm gonna move beyond this. Is that okay? Now, I think, yeah, okay, before we get started on introductory topics, are there any other questions? Any other, like, questions, clarification, thing? No? Okay, all right. Let's go ahead and let's get started. Basic question then, before I even explain to you this map and where this comes from. Define race. What is race to you? What does race mean? How would you put it into words?
A label of society to kind of put people into groups depending on where they.
Sorry, repeat that.
A label created by society to compartmentalize people into certain groups depending on where they're from or what they look like or whatever makes them identifiable.
Yeah, sure. Anyone want to add to that? Anyone have anything else they want to add? Maybe you see race in a slightly different way. Do you agree with that? What do we know about race? What do we see about race?
It's not technically a real thing. It's mostly a way to organize perceptions.
Yes, it's a way to organize perceptions. Can I get someone else to chime in?
I've heard it used as a social.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, it's going to be a little bit annoying, but get used to it. Work with me.
I've heard people use race in terms of a social or cultural construct almost, which I think is really interesting because it is. When you think of construct, you think of something that's not real, but race is very real.
Yeah, sure. So like a social construct, something that isn't real. And tell me your name. Okay. Does anyone else want to add to that? All right. So yeah, I mean, for the most part, you're absolutely right. That is what we would call race, and it's very complicated, right? Because it is a way that we organize our perception. We can clearly see the visible differences between us as people, as individuals in the room, while also simultaneously knowing that that's not quite a way in which we distinguish ourselves as human beings. So race is in fact a social construct with no biological validity, and by the end of the lecture today, hopefully we can establish that, and I'll give you visual examples of it. The origins of human racial diversity are, believe it or not, a product of recent history, okay? And this comes from the proliferation of humanity across the globe. So what I'm showing you here is a map, okay? This is a map of the world. And what you can see here is that these three colors, red, gold, and yellow, are representative of three different species of human, okay? Now, humans, as a biological species, as organisms, originate from the continent of Africa, okay? And the proliferation of humans predates the existence of Homo sapiens, okay? The first wave of humans to emerge out of Africa was Homo erectus. Feel free to Google Homo erectus on Google Images, and you'll be able to see images of their skulls and everything. Homo erectus, represented in yellow here, emerged out of Africa in let's call it the first wave, about 2.6 million years ago, and proliferated much of the Middle East as well as South and Southeast Asia. And they resided there for about 2 million years or so. The second wave of humans, called Homo neanderthalensis, we'll be going into more detail about this later. Homo neanderthalensis emerges out of Africa partly separate from Homo erectus, and then proliferates much of what we would call Europe or Eurasia, okay? And then lastly, in a third wave, anatomically modern human beings, Homo sapiens, or us, we emerge out of Africa about 200,000 years ago, or we exist as a species about 200,000 years ago, and only emerge out of Africa, let's say, between 200,000 and 50,000 years ago or so. It's also the case that where Homo erectus was long extinct by the time anatomically modern human beings existed, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals coexisted up until about 50,000 years ago or so. And then Neanderthals slowly started to disappear. And if you follow the red arrows here, this is a compilation of genetic, archaeological, and anthropological evidence that basically estimates that anatomically modern human beings arise about 200,000 years ago and start proliferating across much of the globe, hitting the Middle East around 100,000 years ago, hitting Europe as late as 40,000 years ago or so, and then just spreading across the globe. Branching off, diverging. Yes. Microphone? Yeah.
Oh, I was just asking, why is it Neanderthalis instead of the th sound?
It's a way to pronounce it. Some people pronounce Neanderthal. Some people say Neanderthal. Tomato, tomato.
Like pecan and pecan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Pecan and pecan, tomato, tomato, that kind of thing. Yes. So a distinct group of human beings who diverged around East Asia crossed an ice bridge approximately 15 to 20,000 years ago or so, inhabiting much of these icy, let's say, circumpolar areas. And then their descendants slowly started to populate North and South America. And so many of these indigenous populations existed as late as about 15,000 years ago in these areas, okay? And so the racial diversity that we see across human beings is more or less what we call clinal variation. We'll be going into detail about this on next week, so I'm not going to overload you with information. But the closer these human populations are to the equator, the darker their skin is, as well as a number of other features and traits like hair texture, eye color, height, body type and size, those kinds of things. And the further away from the equator they get, let's say the further north we get, the lighter and lighter their skin is, the straighter their hair is. And these human beings are adapting to those different climates. They're selecting for different traits that ultimately lead to the emergence of the prevalence of different traits among those groups and among those populations. Okay? So this is how anthropologists, archaeologists, paleontologists estimate that human beings have come to essentially inhabit virtually every corner of the globe. This is how they've mapped that out, okay? And this also, I'm showing this to you here because this is where we understand the proliferation of race to be. And so I want to give you visual examples of that diversity, okay? This is not your core book, but you will be reading the first chapter of this book, and we'll be talking about it next week. The PDF of that chapter is already on Brightspace. You already have access to it. But in this book, there are a series of images. This is a book published in 1965 by Carlton Kuhn called The Living Races of Man. And Carlton Kuhn was an anthropologist who essentially tried to travel the globe and to visually document the diversity of human beings in various parts of the world, for their cultures, for their languages, for their physical features. And there's some very interesting things that he uncovers ultimately about race. He also has he creates his own racial category system for being able to group these people racially. And so I want to kind of show that to you. This will be the only time that we spend an extensive period of time looking at pictures of people. But I want to encourage you, first of all, as we're looking at these pictures, look at the pictures of these people and observe their race. Observe their difference. Look at what they look like in their faces, in their cultures, in the ways that they present themselves, and the ways that they either compare or differ. And if you have questions as we're going through this, please feel free to ask. But we're just going to be looking at pictures of people as a way to kind of just, let's say, break the ice and break our palates a little bit, okay? So I'm going to pull this up really quick. Okay. All right, so I have this book here. And I'm wondering, is that clear? Kind of. I'm wondering, maybe I should. Does that make it a little bit better? I'm not sure. Okay. All right, so we're going to go through these images. Now, I want to tell you Carlton Kuhn comes up with his own like categorical system for grouping people, and it is different than the one you're familiar with that we use here in the US and elsewhere. So he does not necessarily use the terms black, white, Asian, Native American. He doesn't come up with that. Instead, he groups these people partly based on how they look, partly based on geographic origin, partly based on a number of other things. And I want you to see if you can find the flaws in this naming system so we can talk about it. The first group of people I want to show you that he's taken pictures of are what are called circumpolar people. Can anyone take a guess at what circumpolar means? Yeah, maybe around the circumference of the North Pole, okay? So these are the circumpolar people. First of all, here you have a Norwegian Lapp woman. You can see here. Okay. Let's see, there you go. And throughout the book, he describes some of their physical features as sort of being like hybridized. So for example, in these three male figures that you see here, perhaps they display some characteristics of what you would call Caucasian, but then are hybridized with what we would call Asian as well. It's kind of a little bit of a mixture. Broad cheeks, sharp eyes, straight hair textures, kind of a squared off chin, for example. But it's interesting because this Norwegian Lapp boy looks kind of different. Okay. A Samoyed man and a yucca gear. A Tungus woman. She has very broad, but also gracile features. The most prominent features in her face are her chin, perhaps. And she has a relatively flat face with a protruding chin. Very interesting. I'm trying to get the glare. Ugh. Let me see if I can turn off the light. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. Just a little bit clearer. If you want to come up after class and see these pictures, you're welcome to do so. Very interesting faces. So he would racially categorize all of these people as being circumpolar. Some of them we would call Asian. Some of them we would call Caucasian today. But he's grouping them based on geographic region or origin. Okay? Some of them have the monolid feature, and some of them don't. All right, we hit an interesting area. I covered up the descriptions for these because I want to ask people. So the hairy back that you see on this person, that's his back here. Okay. Would any of you like to take a guess at where you think these people are from? Again, he's grouping them as circumpolar. So you can kind of think about perhaps what region of the globe. If we had to guess a country, countries that we know of and use the names of today, where would you say these people are from? Feel free to take a guess, and it's okay to be wrong. Can anyone pass the mic all the way back for me? Thank you. Tell me your name. You don't have to speak it. Just hold it. It'll pick it up. Where would you guess? Where was that? Greenland. Okay. Anyone else? Canada. Okay, sure. It's going to be interesting when you figure out the answer. One more guess. What was that? Not a laser hair removal place. Yeah, sure. One more guess. Okay, so these are native Japanese people. They are indigenous Japanese people. They are from the Ainu culture. If I take off the, let me take that off. There we go. They are, oh, you can't even read it. These are Ainu from Japan. They're native Japanese people. The Ainu come from the Hokkaido region of Japan. Does anyone know why they might be so hairy? For example, hairiness is a very valued, favored trait among these people. This woman, for example, you can kind of faintly make it out here. She has a mustache tattoo around her mouth. Hairiness is something that is valued in this culture. Why do you think it would be? Yeah.
I think it's of the weather conditions in Hokkaido is like really cold.
Can I, sorry, just pass it over. And please tell me your name.
I think it's just because of like weather condition, or it needs like hair to kind of survive like the winter, like cold conditions there. And like the reason why we lose hair is because we adapt to like the climate, and we have like technology to like kind of keep us from the cold.
Yeah. That is partially true, right? Hairiness is going to be valued as a survivable trait because in those really harsh winters, hairiness is something that is going to confer survival in this regard, right? Human beings, by and large, have selected for hair loss on most of our body in most global cultures, but in this one, it is perfectly preserved and actually becomes a desirable trait. Another question I like to ask, and yeah, it's a little bit of a controversial question, but you'll see why in a second. What is this person's hairy back reminiscent of? You know you want to say it. It's okay. Controversial topics here. Get used to it. It's an uncomfortable question. What is that reminiscent of?
It's similar to like the evolution that we came from, like apes, monkeys, primates.
There you go, right? So where chimpanzees, for example, closest biological cousin, has complete covered hair for the most part, this is just a trait that was perfectly preserved. Now, that is an uncomfortable connection to make. I'm not making a connection to black people and monkeys. I'm not even going there, but we're going to talk about primates in a little bit, probably next week. But this is just a feature or a trait that was retained. If I pulled up, for example, let me go back to, I'm going to go back to Google for just a second. I want to show you something really interesting. If I showed you the image of a hairless chimp, let's say this image, and you just, right, and you just covered his face, what does his body type look like? Looks like a man, right? The only difference is he doesn't have any hair on his body. You could do the same thing for this one right here. Cover his face, and what do you notice, right? So I just mean to say that, yes, it's uncomfortable for a number of reasons, but you can clearly see that this is just a retained feature that became valued in this culture. Right? Let's move on. Lastly, this is an Ainu man who happens to be clean-shaven, and you can see his hair is cut. Okay, we'll move on to what Kuhn calls the American Indians. Okay, does anyone know where the name American Indian came from? Pass the mic and please tell me your name. Where did that come from?
I think I might be wrong, but didn't Christopher Columbus think that he was like going to India or something, and so like he called them like American Indians or something?
Yes, the colloquialism was that they were Indians because they were looking for India, and then they were like, are these the Indians? Well, these Indians don't look like the Indians we know, and then the name just kind of stuck, and it kind of stayed that way. So these are the people he calls the American Indians. This man was from Connecticut, for example. You see the chief of the Quiacatil people right here. This man is a Mandan chief, and this is a Hoopa woman. Now these particular people are from the regions that we now call the United States. Okay. But as we go on, you're going to start seeing quote unquote American Indians that look like they are from other places, perhaps Mexico, perhaps Guatemala, perhaps Costa Rica or Venezuela. Right? Very interesting and unique faces. What do you notice about this face right here in the bottom right?
He has a bowl cut.
Well, yes, he has a bowl cut. What about his face? You look like you want to say? The Asian monolid? Yeah, the thing that we would call Asian monolid today. Believe it or not, it actually doesn't belong to Asian people. And yes, according to the global map that I showed you, the indigenous people of the Americas are in fact descended from what we would call Asian today. But believe it or not, this monolid feature, or the eye slant, the elongated eyelids, that is actually a trait that comes from Africa, and I'll show you that in a second. Most people, I've heard this like misinformation on social media, for example, where people are saying, oh no, my receiver died. People are saying that, for example, the monolid feature came from being able to increase vision in the snow or something like that. That's not true, and I'll be showing you that in a moment. Particularly, these people don't necessarily inhabit regions where snow falls. So just kind of keep that in mind, I suppose. Okay. Right. Some of them have faces of people that you would probably just see walking around downtown LA, right? The guy on the bottom left, for sure, certainly has a face of a very familiar type that you would expect to find in LA or San Diego or San Francisco or something like that, right? And a lot of these people that we would know of as the Spanish speakers today, the people who are being stigmatized for crossing the border and things like that, they're all native. Every single one of them, right? I wouldn't call them American Indians. Personally, I call them the first Americans. That's just the name I would use, particularly in the political climate where we're, America first. Well, okay, the first Americans are these people, right? If no one else should call themselves American, these people should get that name, right? We'll talk next week about where they even began to speak Spanish. That wasn't their original language, or languages, perhaps. But they have interesting and unique faces. Okay. Then we move on to what Kuhn calls the Mongoloids of East Asia. Okay. The Mongoloids here really represent what in America we call Asian, right? With the monolid feature, high unmelanated skin, straighter textured hair, very broad faces. Okay. This is a Hakanese man. This is a Fukianese man. This is Japanese. A Japanese student here. Another Japanese farmer. Okay. This is a Mongolian man. This is a man from Tibet. Now that we're getting into Mongoloid, and you just saw circumpolar before, are there any connections you can make? Are there any things that stick out to you? Inconsistencies, perhaps? Yeah.
I think it's traveling all around the world. I would like it to be like left to right or right to left or
Sure.
down to up.
Sure. He's, in this case, all of the pictures just happen to be compiled in the back section of the book. So maybe that's part of it, but I agree with you. There should be some kind of order to beyond just a description. Some of these people, in my opinion, this woman, for example, according to his classification of Mongoloid, I wouldn't call her Mongoloid. What's also interesting, or at least what sticks out to me, is that what he's calling Mongoloid here, he was calling circumpolar. And there were some other examples of people with similar features.
When was this published?
This was published in 1965.
Oh, that makes sense.
So at the time, anthropologists were interested in race. What are the racial origins of people? Why do we look so different? Why do some of us take on the archetypes of looking similar to others? How do we group these things together? How do we tell them apart? And there was an ongoing debate about those things in a scientifically meaningful sense. And it's interesting because there is no perfect way to categorize people on the basis of how they look, or where they're from, or what language they speak, or the cultures that they belong to, the gods they pray to. It is very abstract. And yet, to some extent, you can group people on similarities, but there's no perfect system for doing so. He calls these people Mongoloid. Then we get to what Kuhn calls the Australoids. Okay. These are the Australoids. Is the name here pretty self-explanatory? Right? Okay. Now, keep in mind, he's calling them Australoids, and watch what happens. Watch what kinds of faces you see. Okay. Yeah, we see some Australian Aboriginals. We see a Tasmanian woman, people from Papua New Guinea. Okay. He calls them Australoid, but I suppose here in the US, most of these people we would just call black. Okay. This man on the left, he's from Fiji. The woman on the right is called a Negrito. And this particular picture here, this woman on the left, she's also called a Negrito. Can anyone take a guess as to where she might be indigenous to? Does anyone know? The Philippines. This is an indigenous Filipino woman and her indigenous Filipino children. We would call them black. Right? Isn't that interesting? She has some features we might associate with being Asian, but then she has the kind of kinky, coily hair that defies gravity, dark melanated skin.
Nowadays we would say Blasian.
Blasian, perhaps. Like hybridized, like, oh, she's biracial. No, she's just native Filipino. Isn't that interesting? Then we start seeing other people who you might just call African or black, but for some reason he calls them Australoid. Yes, where's the microphone? Sorry. Yeah. And tell me your name.
My name is. And in the process of the creation of this book, is it based on purely where they found people at like during the creation, or did it like take into account like any of where they were born or their past, or is it purely just where they're located at the time? Would you know?
It's difficult for me to say. Honestly, I haven't read this book since I was in grad school, so it's been several years. What I recall is the guy, he starts in Africa, but just kind of works his way out trying to take pictures of people. And it's largely based on location, but because his interest is in race, he's trying to group them based on appearance. So there's inconsistencies because of the the disconnect between location and appearance. And unfortunately, it's an imperfect naming system where now you have African-looking people he's calling Australoid, but then there's some Asian-looking people he's calling circumpolar, while others are Mongoloid, and it's not really clear what line he's drawing other than geography, which geography isn't race, right? So it's gonna be imperfect, no matter what way you look at it. Yeah, and it's in the 60s too. Next week, when you read chapter 1, again, that is a PDF that is accessible. You do not need to buy this book. When you read chapter 1, you've got to read it with that context in mind. Take it for the time that it was written in. But we're gonna analyze it and we're gonna critique it. And he doesn't necessarily do these people justice by talking about them and describing them in the ways that he does. But we'll be talking about that. Interestingly, we get to people who are from India here that he's calling Australoid. And if you recall the map that I showed you with those red arrows, you would see that, let's say, the indigenous Australians would be descended from the people, or a group of people, who may have resembled those from India, perhaps, but yet he's calling the Indians Australoid. Doesn't quite make sense. Like I said, we're looking at pictures. You might be a little bit bored. I'm not sure. Maybe you're interested in this. This will be the only time we do something like this. But it's interesting to look at the variation, the diversity that you see here, the differences between people, or how they look. This is a Samoan chief right here. Sorry for the glare. And these are Micronesian people. This is a Samoan woman, and then this is a Maori woman here from New Zealand. And then this woman right here on the left, most people might call her white, for example, but she's actually Native Hawaiian. Then we get to what Kuhn calls the Caucasoids. And he links them from Ireland to India. So now somehow Indian people are both Australoid and Caucasoid. Pay attention to the flaws here.
Was he sober when you wrote this?
Excellent question. I'm going to assume so, because I do think that as problematic as as we might be able to point out the flaws in his logic and his writings, he is a coherent writer. He's very clear. He tries to be as consistent as he can be. But again, this is the reality of race is, okay, we all see these differences. This is a Belgian man. We see these differences. We want to understand why they're there. We want to acknowledge them. If we can scientifically understand them, I am all for making the attempt to do so, but the unfortunate reality is that because race is not a biologically valid concept, there is no adequate way to biologically categorize these people. They're all members of the same species, and depending on geographic location, sorry for the glare here, let me see if I can, before, just want to allow you to see this person's face. It's just that it happens to be, depending on geographic location, there are a cluster of specific traits and features that belong to those kinds of people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they uniquely belong to those people.
Especially nowadays, since everybody is moving and migrating so often.
That's part of it. Again, apologies for the glare here. Trying to allow you to see. Right, so maybe some Arab-looking people or Middle Eastern people he would group in and call them Caucasoid. Allow you to see this person's face. Okay. It's fairly interesting. Almost done. We're almost out. Okay. Interestingly, you get down here to these two faces on the bottom left, and he would call them Caucasoid. One of them, an Australoid or with Australoid features, but is from the Middle East, has straighter textured hair but dark melanated skin, but he calls him a Caucasoid. The guy on the left has kinky coily hair, is also Arab, and he would group him as a Caucasoid purely based on location.
Is that a term?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. Then where he grouped some of the people from Nepal into the Mongoloid or Australoid category, he now calls this Nepalese Bhutan man a Caucasoid. He groups Sikhs in the Caucasoid grouping. It's very inconsistent. Then we get to the Africans. Let me see if I can pull this down. Maybe if I did that. Is that better? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Then we get to the Africans. And you'll have your African Neapolitan, you know, your white chocolate, your milk chocolate, and your dark chocolate, depending on the region. Right? Let's see, is that clear? Yeah. Very unique and different faces. This man here is a South African Bushman. These two people are from what's called the Klang tribe in South Africa. I can't do the clicks. I don't know. It's not my language, unfortunately. He's often interested in their body types and why certain traits are prevalent among certain groups that aren't in others. You see this monolid feature again in this African girl here. She also has the monolid feature too. In the description, unfortunately, you can't see it because of the glare. He describes this girl as a woman who could pass for Dutch if her hair was straight and her skin was lighter. What I want you to get from this is that there is no particular trait or feature, whether that's the monolid eye slant, straight textured hair, melanated skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. None of these traits or features uniquely belong to any specific group of humans. All groups of people have the capacity to display all of those traits. So in the US, what we call Asian, particularly because of the eyes, does not actually belong uniquely to Asian people. You can observe those features in Africans who have no geographic or genetic connection to Asia whatsoever. You can observe those features in people from Europe. For example, this guy here, he describes them as having European features. If you look at his face, for example, he looks like one of those blokes you might find in a British pub if he had lighter skin and straighter hair. He really does. He has no genetic connection to Europe whatsoever. Okay. Then he gets to Madagascar, which for better or worse, we're talking about people from the continent of Africa, but some of whom have slightly straighter textured hair, but still have big nose, big lips, dark skin. Some of them have lighter skin and look like they might be from some kind of Southeast Asian country, but no connection to Asia whatsoever. They're just African. Okay, and this is the last picture here. So based on what I've just shown you, what can you say you've learned or pieced together about race as a biological concept? Somebody, anybody. What are you taking away from this? Yeah.
That there's no actual, especially visual, singular identifier of race. It's all kind of just like trying to turn Play-Doh solid as glass. It's not going to happen. But yeah, the most important thing I think is how people categorize themselves personally
Yes.
and what groups they feel they belong to.
That's sure. Yeah, that's part of it. Anyone want to add?
I think this older definition of race kind of like makes you realize just how much of a social construct race is, whereas our newer, more modern definition of race is more tied to genetics
Yes.
or like visual.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that?
And most of the verbiage that he used probably would apply today.
No, it wouldn't, but it wouldn't for numerous reasons. Even the language we use doesn't really fly today. Let me see if I can get through this in about 5 minutes or so. What time does this class end? Can someone remind me? 20 or 25? 25. 35. Okay, we still have time. Great. So now, I want you, anybody, you do not have to identify as a black person, but just a friendly reminder, this is still African American Studies. Define blackness. What is that?
Just like having like melanin in your skin, or like.
Sure, maybe, yeah, like melanated skin, like mine. Maybe even, tell me your name. Okay, we all have different degrees of, I would say you're the white chocolate, I'm the milk chocolate, you're the dark chocolate, right? Sure. Okay. What else? What defines blackness? Yeah.
In terms of like.
And pass the mic, I'm sorry, so sorry.
Blackness, it depends because you can be black and be anywhere, but I'm thinking about the term Black Americans because that's different from being African, which I'm also African, but we want to get into that. But Black Americans are descendants of slaves that were brought here for labor and basically had to learn to identify in a culture that wasn't their own or operate in a culture that wasn't their own. And it created a new culture of Blackness, Black Americans who are from Africa, brown skin, and have the traits that would lead to certain persecution and othering.
It's complicated,
Yes.
is what you mean to say. Yes. Yes, I agree with everything you've just said. Does anyone want to add to that? Maybe it's not just a descriptor of your physical features. What else, aside from physical features, might constitute being black?
The verbiage or the lingo that you use.
Like ethnicity. It's not just a phenotypic category. It's also like there's lots of cultural components associated with it. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, and
Okay.
especially it can be speech, it can be practices, it could be certain things like, if I said I ain't gonna answer this question, that would be like something like wording that is closer to Black culture.
All right, so I want to play a game with you. By a show of hands, hands up meaning yes, hands down meaning no. Would you call this person black? Is this person black? Show of hands. Yes. Okay, most people say yes, obviously. Okay, great. Is this person black? Yes, right? Notice the monolid feature here. Again, doesn't uniquely belong to what we call Asians. Okay. Is this person black? Most hands up, some hands down. Okay. Sure. Now, can I get an answer for why somebody would say no? Yeah.
Well, I think when I say black, I tend to think Black Americans, and there are certain things like as far as clothing and uh, whether your face is shaved or hair is cut or something that just I think in terms of Black Americans they don't fit into the category.
Okay.
Or in my own personal opinion.
Okay, sure. Is this person black? Couple of hands. Okay, most. All right, and then some say no. All right, is this person black? 0 hands. Very interesting. Is that person black? All hands up. Okay, sure. Are these people black? All hands up. Okay. What about these women? Are they black? Hands? Some people are like, I mean, kind of like, I don't know, like I'm in the middle. Okay, make it clear. Hands up, hands down. Are these women black? Tell me your name. Okay. Most people said no. Are these people black? Most people say yes. Okay. And are these two, both of them, is this woman black? No. Is this woman black? Yes. Okay. Does anyone know the story about these two?
Aren't they like twins?
They are twins. Same pregnancy, same parents. Isn't that interesting? Right? Because part of the way that we call people black is based on your parents. Right? And I'll show you their parents in a second. But when you see their parents, it will make perfect sense. But right now on its own, when you see them, you're like, ain't no way they're twins. They absolutely are. Same parents, same pregnancy, same family. Okay? Now, technically, anthropologically speaking, I'm not talking about ethnically, I'm not talking about biologically to an extent, I'm just saying anthropologically. Every single person on the screen is a kind of black person. And there's lots of variations in between, obviously, that I'm not showing you because I can't possibly fit all of the degrees of variation into a single PowerPoint slide. Okay? These people, for example, they identify themselves as black Mexicans. Okay? They are the descendants of formerly enslaved people from the US that fled into Mexico to gain their freedom. And then, started families with some of the other Mexican people in those regions, producing people who look like that and do in fact speak Spanish. Anyone want to take a guess as to where this man is from? Australia. He's an Aboriginal. Believe it or not, there are lots of Australian Aboriginals. In fact, I'm fairly confident. I mean, I'm not Aboriginal, obviously, but I'm fairly confident in saying most of them identify as black. And in fact, if we're talking about melanated skin, kinky, coily hair, to an extent, they have those things. They're just native to Australia. These people down here, native to the Philippines. Again, they're the Filipino Negritos. They have some of those unique facial features that clearly belong to that region, while they still have the melanated skin and the kinky, coily hair that defies gravity, right? This woman here, don't pay attention to the language she speaks, the clothes she wears, or the god or gods that she might pray to. Look at the human being, okay? And connect everything that I'm saying back to that map that I showed you, that when humans emerged out of Africa, many of them took their blackness with them across the globe and started creating their own cultures, their own languages, their own ways of being and surviving in the world. And it became diversified and varied. And so the diversity of blackness on a human scale, on a human spectrum, is going to look like this. These are the Elmer twins. Here, I'll pull up get Google Chrome here. The Aylmer twins and their parents. Let me see. These are their parents. That's their mom. That's their dad. These are the two of them right there. Obviously, they're siblings. It makes perfect sense when you see the entire family together, but then them on their own, you wouldn't think they're sisters at all, right? So understand here that I am just on day one. We are establishing here that race is not a biologically valid concept at all, and that who we assign racial categories, how we assign ourselves racial categories, the ways that we identify is a very, very, very complex mixture of heritability, of ethnicity, place of origin, parentage, phenotypes, because we know that these two sisters probably have very different social experiences, despite the fact that they began their lives at the same time. Right? Just keep that in mind. It's fairly interesting, right? Okay. Now, define African American. This is African American studies after all. What does that mean? You think it's a trick question? Like,
No.
Okay.
It can mean two things. It can mean if you, for example, say your parents are Nigerian and they came to America for work, and then you grew up, but you grew up mostly operating in Nigerian culture in your household and probably your community around you, but you're also American. You have growing up in American, navigating life as an American. That can mean one thing, but it could also mean descendants of slaves who had to adapt and kind of adjust African and blend American culture as they live their lives.
Yeah, sure.
There are like also like more interesting things when you look at like those who are Northern African or like Egyptian, and you see that they aren't necessarily like as commonly like defined as African American, despite quite literally being from Africa.
It could be a literal interpretation. It could be a figurative interpretation. There's lots of different ways that the term African American can apply. I'll show you more examples in just a second, but we're just talking about a specific kind of black person, not the only kind of black person, just one particular kind with a unique history, a unique experience, a unique culture. Yes.
Is this kind of similar to how the way most people who are Indian don't say I'm Asian, even though India is in Asia?
To my knowledge and my experience, lots of Indian people actually do identify as Asian.
Mhm.
I think it's a standard in the US that Asian just means
It's like
the way that looks. They would call it Asian. But I know some Indians, including Indians in the last class or the last sections that I've taught, that just identify as Asian. It's just hard because it's like, how do you identify? How do people see you? What's the name you're using? How does that name even apply? Is it even contextually relevant? Because yes, we know these particular people to be African American in the sort of socio-cultural historical sense, but then like you have examples of like Barack Obama, for example, who's like, if you take the literal interpretation, is literally African and American. Anyone know his parentage?
Was this something from Hawaii?
He was born in Hawaii, but his mom was a white woman from Kansas, and his dad was an African man from Kenya. So he's quite literally African American, right? And then that carries a different meaning than like Kamala Harris, for example, who is part Asian by virtue of one of her parents being from India, and then the other one is an African-American man, according to African-American in the way that I'm loosely using the terminology, right? And then her nationality is American, and so therefore she is African-American. The thing that I'm trying to point out to you is that even this language is not useful for describing racially where people belong. The same concept applies for Asian American or Latin American. It's just a loose use of words to try to describe a person that cannot really be described using these kinds of words. And there is no perfect naming system or categorical system that can accurately categorize every single kind of person based on how they look or what their parentage is. Okay? So there are a few assumptions that I am making in this class. The first assumption is I am assuming, based on what we just talked about, what I just showed you, I'm assuming that you have a nuanced awareness of the concept of race. And if you didn't before you entered this class, congratulations, you now do. Okay? I'm also assuming that because, again, this is an African American Studies class, that you have an awareness of what racial injustice is. Okay? Because yes, race is not a biologically valid concept, but it still has real-world implications and real-world impact. And we're going to be talking about all of that throughout this class. So I'm assuming you have an awareness of that. I'm assuming you know there was a civil rights movement and everything, not necessarily knowing everything that informed it, but you're aware that that happened. Okay? I'm also making the assumption that you have the understanding that all members of a given racial group don't necessarily think alike. They don't look alike. And just because we group them together based on this loose classification system doesn't necessarily mean that's where they belong. And then finally, I'm assuming that you have the understanding that African American history is literally just American history. And there's no distinction other than the fact that we're talking about a particular group of people. Now, in this class, we're going to be talking about all different kinds of racial identities, not just African Americans, okay? So you're going to learn a little bit about your own racial history and experience and the ways in which it's contextualized in this context too. But do know that this is African American Studies, so at the end of the day, we're going to connect it back to African American Studies. And then lastly, if you're just going through the motions to be here because you have to fulfill a requirement, this isn't the class for you, okay? I'm assuming that everyone here actually has an interest in learning about these things, in talking about them, and is not just going to do the bare minimum to just be here and get by, okay? So I'm making all of those assumptions because we're going to be diving deep into these discussions about race and racism, and I'm truly looking for you to engage with those things, okay? Now, generally, what I will do is if you've participated in class, at the end of class, you'll come up, I'll write your name down, and you'll get credit. But during the weeks that we have in-group assignments, like in the next class period, everyone's going to be talking, so everybody gets engagement credit and participation credit. I need all of you to show up because in the very next class, in our in-group activity, I'm going to racially segregate you, okay? All right. Get ready for it. It's going to be a fun class, I promise you. All right. I will see you on